So thank you guys for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I'm going to be real honest with you and let you know that I did not prepare a memorized speech with a PowerPoint like these rock stars did. I wanted to give you as much information as possible, and I felt like I could do that better if I just kind of, had my notes with me. It's also another way of me saying that I just was too lazy to memorize it or put together a PowerPoint. So there's that.
Deal.
Yeah. Anyway, today we're going to talk about really fun stuff, fear and rejection. Yay! The rock stars of the party. But we're also going to talk about how to be resilient to both of those things. First, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a wellness coach for over a decade. I've been on stage every single year of my life for over 2 decades. And I'm currently running a company called Fearce Academy, spelled Fearce, it's not a typo. And that helps brave leaders and artists face their fears, hone their craft, and sort of make a bigger impact with what it is they're trying to share with the world. And the stuff that I'm going to be delivering to you today is sort of directly from the programming that I offer through Fearce Academy. What I didn't tell you yet is that for over half of both of those wellness and singing careers, I struggled with astonishing stage fright. So you might ask yourself, okay, you struggled with astonishing stage fright for over half of those careers, doing the math, that's like 15 years. How did I get through? How did I make it through? And the answer is pretty simple, actually. Performance anxiety manifests in 2 outcomes. One outcome is that you have stage fright, you get on stage and you mess up, and you're publicly embarrassed, and you go home with that, and you're forced to address your fears or quit, either way. But no matter what, you're forced to do something about the fact that you have crippling stage fright, right? Then there's this other outcome where you get on stage, you crush it, and you just feel like shit before and after. I was the latter. And because I always did a good job on stage, I never really felt like there was motive to change. I would walk out under the bright lights, do my thing, the audience would wildly applaud, my anguish would be put on pause, and then I'd walk off and go back to feeling like a fraud. So I didn't have a need to change because I always felt like I was getting praised. The thing is that it wasn't always like this either. So it wasn't, in the beginning, maybe around 8 years old, I was liberated on stage. I was set free. I was connected. I was fearless. It helped me kind of manage the troubles of my life. But then high school happened, and bad skin and bad grades and bullying and body insecurities also happened. And that triggered the beginning of my stage fright. And performance, as much as I loved it, no longer became the thing that I could escape into. It also became one of the troubles of my life. The biggest problem, though, wasn't that I actually had fear. That's human. The biggest problem was that I had no idea how to deal with it. I was taught in my performance world that the fear was a weakness, actually. If you're afraid, you're weak, and there's no place for fear. If you're too afraid to get on stage and do your job, then get off. Someone else will take your spot. Like, you're not in the right industry. Someone else will take my spot. Like, this is the only thing I knew how to do. This is the only thing I ever wanted to do. That's not going to happen, right? So I didn't learn to develop critical thinking skills around fear. I didn't learn to cope with it. I just buried it in hopes that I would be more fearless. Needless to say, that it actually became a monster that consumed me and eventually compromised my health, which I can get into later. But the bigger message is that after years of fighting my fears and losing, I realized that the answer isn't to bury or fight your fears, it's to befriend them, actually, and turn them into fuel. And that helped me understand that the only way to really be fearless is actually just to face your fears and own that you have them. So at this point, you might also ask, well, isn't stress part of performing? Doesn't everybody get nervous? Totally. When you're stressed, your nerves feel like little butterflies in your belly. That's normal and that's healthy. But when they turn into tiny vampire bats with machine guns, as my client likes to say, that's not healthy, that's not normal. And as a matter of fact, that's what we know as turning into chronic stress. And you guys probably know a little bit about that from these amazing presentations where there's a whole bunch of wellness education. But just as a little reminder, chronic stress can turn into things like anxiety disorders, depression, addiction, higher risk of heart disease, higher risk of immunity suppression. It also leads to gluconeogenesis, which is this sort of process where your muscles and your connective tissue and your bones break down to provide blood sugar for your brain. A sustained amount of that, I feel like I don't need to explain why that would be bad to a room full of health and wellness professionals and how that would like work against everything that we're doing. So chronic stress sucks. And after years, as I said before, after years of fighting my fears and losing and living that space of chronic stress, I get really locked in that you don't negate or try to eradicate your fear. You own it and befriend it. And I'm going to get into the befriending part now. You're like, how do you befriend your fears? Well, befriending your fears, befriending anybody, usually comes with the process of compassion and understanding. It's really hard to develop compassion for someone or something without understanding them or knowing them a little bit. So let me give you an example. A friend says something really mean about Ryan's boot. Let's say one of his friends is like, man, your boot is ugly. And they're like yelling at him and they're super mean about it, okay?
You can't even walk right.
Yeah. Like, if you're Ryan with your boot and you're like already having a hard time, and you're not putting into context of where they're coming from, you might go like, well, fuck you know, like, that's not really nice of you to say that, you know, like, that you're just, you know what, maybe you're just not really a good friend after all, and you can spiral into these stories that are being made. But if you put it into context and you understand that person's actually just going through a divorce right now, and they have the flu at the same time, double whammy, then you might take a step back and go, you know what, it sucks that I have a boot on and I'm really the one that needs love and care, but so do they. And so I have compassion for where they're coming from. I'm not as angry. I'm not going to react. And now this doesn't have to be an ugly situation. It's actually the same with your fears. If you can, fear has such a bad rep, man. It's always like the troublemaker, the bad guy, which is probably why I love talking about it so much. But the thing with it is that it's the same thing. You can understand your fear a little bit better, and you can understand more deeply the function of it and the science behind it. You can stop being so afraid of your fears, and you can stop being angry at your fears, and you can start developing compassion for yourself and befriend your fears and learn to manage them. And it's not about overcoming your fears, by the way. It's different than pain. You want to overcome your pain. But with fear, you don't overcome your fear because you're always going to have it. So you learn to coexist with it as a buddy. And we're going to get into that. So we're going to dive deeper into the science first. The science of fear is helpful because when you talk about science and logic, it grounds you into the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is the problem-solving, solutions-driven part of the brain, which takes you out of the amygdala, out of the emotional center of the brain, and allows you to calm down around this concept of fear. Like, even the word itself probably gives you the shivers because it makes you feel afraid. My job here is to give you a little bit more of a positive association by the time you leave. So we talk about the science of fear to calm our emotional center down so we can think more logically about it, and so that we can develop a positive association with it. So the first thing I'll start with is the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to make this really simple and to the point. But basically, the autonomic nervous system has three components. First component, or not even first, but just one of the components, is the enteric nervous system, which is your gut brain, which is actually super important, by the way. So much research on that right now, talking about how integral your gut feeling is. The other part of the autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is rest, relax, digest. It's the part of the nervous system where you're able to digest and intake all of these amazing products from USANA, properly rebuild your muscle tears from all your training, get proper sleep, all of those things. So this is why recovery sessions and proper nutrition is really important, so that the parasympathetic nervous system can come into balance with its counterpart, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So really simply, that is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the nervous system. You guys have heard this before, but just as a little bit of a reminder, the physiological response related to the sympathetic activity, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, what happens to your body is sweaty hands, fast heart, shallow breathing, tense muscles, an influx of adrenaline, rapid thoughts. Nothing wrong with that. That's a normal stress response to your sympathetic nervous system. The mental manifestation, what that looks like, is something along the lines of sort of quick, harsh, critical thinking, reactionary thinking, and a lot of self-doubt. Now, I'll remind you, both those physiological responses and mental responses are normal and healthy and needed at certain times. So we shouldn't try to demonize that part of the nervous system. It's really, really important to remember. I like to think about the fear and the sympathetic response and the stress response as like a bodyguard. It's just your guy. It's like Justin Bieber's big guy, like taking him through the paparazzi and all the people, right? Protecting him from danger and getting crushed. It's the same thing. Our fear is protecting us from what we need to stay alive, essentially. It's like our bodyguard, and it's got one job. And by the way, it ain't getting fired anytime soon. So there's no real point in trying to tamper with that hardwiring, right? Because we need it. So it's about coexisting with it. So this brings us to the subject of real fear versus fake fear. Real fear is fear that's activated from real life or death danger. A lion is chasing you, you don't think, you just react and run. Mental manifestation of that would look something like, and this is more on the fake fear, real fear side of things. Let's say you're looking at the edge of a cliff, and for whatever reason in that moment you just forget about the concept of gravity, and you're like, I wonder if I just like took a leap into the air if I could just fly. Like maybe that's something that humans don't know yet, right? You know, maybe they have wings and all they have to do is just trust. Your like self-doubt and inner critic would swoop in like Batman and Robin and be like, you're gonna fail. Let's step on back from the curb. You know what I mean? Or like so those two things, right? The mental inner critic that's like self-doubt and that physiological response of run, those two things are super helpful in those moments of real fear and real danger. Problem is that the body can't tell the difference between real fear and fake fear, which is just basically your negative self-narrative. So your fake fear can be triggered from external factors like standing in front of a bunch of people, your job, your social environment, but ultimately it's rooted in your own thoughts and your own creative narrative. So the problem is the body can't tell the difference between those two, and so it's going to respond in the same sympathetic way, which sucks because you don't want to respond in that way when you're like going up to your girl or guy and ask them on a date. You don't want to respond in that way when you're trying to deliver helpful information. You don't want to respond that way when you're in a sales pitch trying to talk about something that could really help someone. Take it from a girl who lived with fear for 15 years and tried every trick in the book to fight her fears and like bury her fears and run from her fears and like pretend the fears aren't there. That shit doesn't work. What's going to happen if you fight your fears is you're fighting against what it is to be human. So your body is going to go, this is unnatural, let me trigger the fear response and let's keep this engine going. So you fighting your fears or denying your fears or pushing them away or running from them is only going to create more fear. It also doesn't work if you positively affirm yourself out of fear. Like putting on your blinders or whatever and like earmuffs and being like, everything is awesome! Like, I am not scared! All that's doing is drowning out how you, I love that song by the way.
Yeah.
All that's the only thing that's doing is it's drowning out how you actually feel. And how you actually feel is afraid. So if you drown out how you actually feel, then that feeling is just going to get louder and louder and louder over your everything is awesome song until it's heard. Right? So what I can say is that compassion and putting your arm around your fear and going, like, we can do this together is the only way. And how you do that is through what I call the voice of reason. So you're not trying to negate your fear, you're not trying to throw it out the window, you're not trying to fight and say, you don't belong, like, get out of here. You're trying to reason with it like you would a child or a friend. So it would look something like this. You're about to go on stage. Let's say you're about to ask someone on a date. It's less intimidating. Maybe not, actually.
Yeah.
That's actually scarier, now that I think about it.
But everybody's done that for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's not, well, we're going to get into rejection in a second as to why that is so scary. But The point is it looks something like this. You're like, okay, and self-awareness is key because if you're not even self-aware that this is happening in your internal dialogue, you can't do anything about it. But when you become aware of your fears and your internal dialogue in an instance that's not real danger, you can say things like literally talk to yourself in a self-soothing voice and say, like, I see that you're trying to protect me right now, and I respect that. Like, you're allowed to be here. We're a team. I'm not trying to get rid of you. No one's trying to fire you. Like, we're gonna be okay. But right now, like, this response isn't helpful. What's helpful is us just working together. So let's take some belly breaths and let's go up there and just do our job. That is how you manage your fear. And it's not an overnight process. It's a practice that you have to choose over and over and over again, sometimes 15 times an hour, sometimes once a week. But it's a choice. And it's a choice predicated on the awareness that you have of what you're noticing. Whether your egotistical ass knows it or not, you need each other. Your fear needs you to be alive because it needs its job. And you need your fear to stay alive. So you need each other, actually. Becoming fearless just isn't it anymore. That's like, whatever. I guess befriending your fears is the new black. Anyway, so I kind of lost my train of thought with that one. right. We don't just need our fears to survive, and our fears don't just need us to be alive in order for us to survive with our fears. We also need our fears to expand our bravery. So here's the funny thing about bravery, which people don't understand, is that bravery and fear are not binary. Actually, bravery is having fear and doing it anyway. You need bravery, or you need fear rather, to invoke bravery, otherwise there'd be no reason to call it brave. So having fear and having that experience as a human being, by the way, it just allows us to kind of go, oh, now I have the opportunity to develop this internal strength called courage, and then I can help other people with that as well. Super, super important stuff, I believe anyway, but I'm like a fear junkie, so whatever. This next part of the lesson is all about rejection and self-love. And it's really easy to identify, when we're in a state of real danger, it's like not hard to kind of figure out why we're afraid. Oh shit, the lion is still chasing me, But with fake fear, it's a little bit harder to identify because it comes in all kinds of codes and symbolisms and messages. And in my research, though, I've realized that no matter what the internal dialogue is, it boils down to one thing. So here's what the internal dialogue could look like. And I implore you to go home and sit down and figure out what your internal dialogue is and what your fears are saying to you. But it comes out like this. I'm afraid of, failure. I'm going to mess up. I'm not worthy enough. I'm underprepared. What are some other good ones here? I'm fraudulent. I'm going to be judged. All of those things, actually, when deconstructed, boil down to one collective core issue, which is fear of rejection. And it's absolutely terrifying. Like, do not get it twisted. It's a big one. And there's a reason for that scientifically. So our fear of rejection and abandonment is a monster, and everyone has it. Even if, like, in your head right now, you're like, I'm not really afraid of that. It's like, you are, trust me. It can just be hiding. But here's the scientific reason behind that. We're neurobiologically hardwired from the time of birth until the time of death to need human connection for survival. And there's science to back that up. There's science from an ancestral point of view, and there's also science from how humans and how you were developed in this lifetime to back that up. But I won't get into that for timing. But here's a new piece of science that really sort of displays how important connection is to us. This is a quote by Janey Brown, who's a PhD and vulnerability researcher, just absolute boss. She said, loneliness is at an all-time high, and it has become a health epidemic. It's a greater predictor of early death than smoking, obesity, and excessive drinking. Loneliness absolutely kills you. So try to tell me now that we don't need connection to survive. And this is why this type of thing, once a month or however many times you do it, is really important, because you're with people, you're building connections, you're building community, and there's so much community within, what you guys are doing with network marketing. So we need connection for survival. And that then explains why we're so terrified of rejection, because ultimately we're equating it to death. And again, I'm just going to tell you this one ancestor story. It's just like, it's so helpful to put this in perspective. I wasn't going to tell it, but it's good. So that like from a neurobiological standpoint, in the caveman years, right? You're with a tribe and you have to go together to get meat. So you're like hunched behind some bushes and there's a pack of saber-toothed tigers and you get excited and you like fire your weapon early, like it's an arrow. I don't know what it is back then. You're a rock, like whatever. You wake up the tigers early. There's like cubs, so the mother's like super pissed, and they all start chasing you, right? This is a good part of the story. It's like you're running from the lion. Still running from the lion. So whatever, people are climbing trees and like everyone's super smart, and for whatever reason you're just like in panic mode and you're not able to like think a little bit clearly within that state of panic, and you run back to the like camp, and the saber-tooth follows you and he eats a bunch of people. Your tribe's gonna be like, okay, we are gonna have to try to not do that one again. So you have to go away forever now. Like you're shunned and shamed away from our tribe. Like you're a hazard to society, we can't trust you. That person knew that they were dead because you don't survive on your own in those years. You have to do it as a community. That is one of the reasons that we equate, when I'm saying we equate rejection to death, not only just from this lifetime and how we're developed as human beings from a baby. That's another reason why rejection is so hardwired in us to be connected to death. So I just wanted to drive that home because I don't think people take the feeling of rejection seriously enough. I don't necessarily think that we need to take it too seriously. I think that there is a way that we can start to come together and go, all right, this is just a human emotion. If I get rejected, it doesn't mean that I'm being rejected for me. It means that that person, whatever, like doesn't want to eat lunch with me. Like it has nothing to do with you at the end of the day and has everything to do with what they need and what they want. So anyway, a little bit off topic, but when we, or rather this deep fear where I'm going with this deep fear of rejection often leads to this, bless you, must feel so good to do that, this incessant need to be flawless. We think that any little artifact of our imperfect humanity revealed to someone else is cause for us to be abandoned and rejected. Like that's what we believe, because we make up really big stories in our head all the time. And it might lead to that. The imperfections that you feel inside might actually be a thing that someone else doesn't like too, and they might like, whatever, not want to be your friend because of it. That can happen. It's okay. We can't control what other people do or say, but forcing a facade just to try to fit in and avoid that is going to make you feel like more of an alien. While perfectionism is the ultimate defense to rejection, it's also the perfect path to self-destruction because we are not gaining an authentic connection with ourselves or with others, and we're actually rejecting ourselves. We're neglecting ourselves. That's the worst kind of rejection of all. So I'll sum that up by saying our lack of ability to accept ourselves is actually never caused by someone else criticizing or rejecting us. Nor is it caused by what they're criticizing or rejecting. Our lack of ability to accept ourselves is caused by the very fact that we haven't yet learned to love and accept the very thing in us that we're rejecting and criticizing in ourselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if that's true, the goal then, as a speaker, as a wellness leader, is never to bend yourself into perfection to change the perception of someone else so that you're liked better by them. It's to bend your own perception of yourself so that you're liked better by you. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
You want me to repeat that one? All right, I will then. The goal is never to bend yourself into perfection, to change someone else's perception to be liked better by them. The goal is to bend your own perception of yourself so that you're liked better by you. That is everything. That is the difference between whether you're able to be resilient to rejection or not. We're not looking external here anymore. That doesn't make sense. right? It starts from the inside out. It's the same thing with mental health and fear management, and you know that as a mental health leader, and there's someone, you as well, yeah. So, having said that, the ability to love yourself or accept the things in you that you're rejecting and criticizing takes a shitload of courage, because it takes the willingness to be vulnerable. True or false? Vulnerability is a weakness.
False.
False. It would take a very strong person to be weak if that were true. Think about that one. It takes a lot of courage to stand in your pain and fear. So of course vulnerability is not a weakness. It's the ability to stand vulnerable and in the unknown and in the uncertain is a huge asset if you're able to do that. But it's not a thing that you're born with. It's not like I have this DNA where there's like tons of courage in me. It's choice, like I said before. Your choice, you have a choice at any given moment to choose courage or comfort. And sometimes you have to make that decision, again, 15 times an hour, depending on the continuum you're in your mental health. So you want to be resilient to fear and rejection? Start loving yourself. And I mean all of you, like all parts of you. It's real easy to love yourself when you've got a weave, when you've got your makeup on, your like fancy suit, you're crushing it at life, you're all put together, you're successful, your money's rolling in, you got a shiny car. Like anybody can love themselves in that premise. I'm talking about loving yourself with your shame, and with your fear, and with your flaw, and with your pain, and with your mistakes, and with your imperfections, and with your ugliness. I'm talking about learning to love that part of you. And that's also a choice of courage. That's self-love. Because that's you being whole. We're not whole without our darkness, actually. So we need to stand brave in our darkness. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. Just a little quote I put together. It's truly my hope and goal as a coach to help you realize that the minute you understand how to love and accept yourself for your brilliance and your blemishes, for your diamonds and your darkness, for your magic and your madness, you'll never be more beautiful than that, because you'll never be more brave than that. So, be human, be seen, flaws and all, be brave, and be fierce.